So we want to welcome today to Happy at Work, Kenzo Fong, entrepreneur, former Google, former Uber, all-around nice guy, works out of his van. And with Happy at Work, it's all about empowering workers, bringing positivity into the workplace, making people happier, and just bringing on really smart guests who could share, what they've learned in their career so that it could help people. And Kenzo, maybe we could start out. You could just tell us who you are, what you do, and we'll jump right into it.
Okay, great. Thanks for having me on the podcast. So I'm Kenzo Fong. I'm the CEO of a company called Rock. With Rock, we're really building a collaboration platform for distributed teams. Think about it as a combination of Slack, Trello, or messaging and project management. Yeah, that's the easiest way to think about
it. And with that product, so this goes. Your clients are international, right? They're everywhere.
That is correct. We have thousands of users, hundreds of teams. Last time I checked, we had people in about 170 countries.
Wow.
So Kenzo, on the platform, what sort of friction are you reducing, i.e. problem that you're solving with the software?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think if I just take a step back, right? And if I just take a step back, like we started building Rock even prior to the pandemic. I was really focused on like solving some of the problems I saw when I was at Uber, right? And like I think everybody on this like podcast like probably like knows this problem, which is there are so many different tools that like every single team or company uses, and there's so much fragmentation, for lack of a better word, where you can send an email, you can send a message on Slack, you have a project management tool like Trello or Asana. Then you have Google Documents or Office documents, and all of that stuff is like spread across all of these different tools. So that's what we set out to solve initially. I also always wanted to build a distributed company because I'm not from the US. I was born and raised in a tiny country called Suriname, which is in South America. So I know that there's a lot of like talent outside of the tech hubs of Silicon Valley or New York or London or any of these major tech hubs. So I wanted to set up a distributed company so to solve that problem that I had seen at Uber and Google, but then also to build this company in a more like global and distributed fashion. So so that's what we set out to do. And I think when the pandemic hit, I think the issues that like we were seeing, not just from like the problem I wanted to solve from my time at Uber, but also building a distributed company, right? I think everybody has been in that like situation for the last 2 years almost, which is unbelievable if you think about it, right? So it's really about like reducing friction in terms of how people work together, making it easier to work in a distributed fashion where you're not in the same office, you might not be in the same city, you might not even be in the same country or time zone, but work keeps on continuing. And like, how do we make that easier? How do we really rethink not just the processes that we have, but also the tools that like we need for a more distributed way of working?
And so I was really interested in your company and what you're doing. I was curious about one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is how distracted we all are in our day. How many different notifications and pings and different emails. I'm checking 3 different emails like in the middle of everything. And so I was curious about with your product and kind of how you're thinking about Rock, this idea of deep work, like the more that we can have the time to focus and concentrate on the things that we're trying to do with our job, I think that creates more meaning for us, right? As employees, to have that that less distraction and more focus and more of that deep work idea. So I was wondering if your thoughts on that. Is that kind of part of this? Because to me, it sort of sounds like one cool outcome that could come from your platform is really reducing the distraction.
Yeah, I think that's a super valid and great point, right? And like this goes back to what I was saying about like my experience working at companies like Google and Uber, where at different points in my career, I was literally in meetings from like 8 a.m. in the morning to 8 p.m. in the evening. And it's like, especially if you do global roles at bigger companies, right? Like in the morning, you do your European calls. During the day, you do your US calls. And then in the evening, you do your like Asia calls, because that's just the way it works if you're in meetings. And as a result, like you don't really have time to sit down and like think and do work, right? So one of the key things I think is super important for distributed teams is shifting towards a more asynchronous way of working, right? And when the pandemic hit, I think most companies did what they could, but like on a dime, they basically sent their entire workforce home, right? And they're like, okay, what we had been doing in the office, now just go do it from home and take your laptop, take Slack, take email, take Zoom, take these tools in the office, and let's just go. And this, right? Like this will work. And I think if anything, the last 2 years have proven that like this does not work, because people now have issues disconnecting. They're like, when does my workday start? When does my workday end? They get pings all the time, because I think what most companies are still doing is they are trying to replicate that in-office culture, which is, hey, let me just walk up to Laura's desk and let me just tap her on her shoulder and say, hey, like, hey, what's up? Like, what are you working on? Or like trying to have that conversation. And I do not think that works when you're working from home, or you're working from anywhere, or you're working from a fan like me, where you're doing your own thing, you're trying to get work done. You're also still trying to juggle like your private life and all the personal things that you need to do. So I think shifting towards a more asynchronous way of working is what most companies need to do to actually make distributed work or hybrid work happen. With Rock, like the way we've built the product is that it's literally like both synchronous and asynchronous, right? So synchronous means similar to Slack, you can send a chat message, or you can set up a Zoom call or a Google Meet call if you really want to talk to somebody. But primarily, we are trying to encourage people to think about like, what's the best way to communicate, right? Like, is this thing that I want to share with Laura, is it urgent? Is it important? Does it be documented? And if that's the case, right, like instead of sending a chat message or setting up a video call, maybe you should create a task which like basically summarizes the thing that like needs to happen or that needs to be discussed. Or you create a topic, very structured, where you have a subject line, the body of like that specific topic, and then you have that discussion, which is very asynchronous, right? Which means you create that topic, you create that task. You will get to, I can like tag you in that topic or task, and then you will get to it when you have time to do it. And as a result, you don't get these continuous pings for like whatever messaging client you're using, or calls, or you don't need to be in like a Zoom call like every single day or like multiple times a day. So you get that deep work back.
Right, exactly.
Exactly, right. And it's it's one of these things where like I think most meetings can actually just be an email or like a task or like a note or like something like that, which is way more asynchronous. And like that by itself has a ton of benefits for a company, for like how work happens, and also like work-life balance and just general like sanity, right?
Completely. It's a huge change though, right? It's a huge shift, especially for people in leadership positions who kind of got to where they are from doing work in person, butts in seats kind of mentality, right? And so it's a huge shift now to think about the asynchronous part. I was curious about when a leader says to you, you know, questions the asynchronous piece, like how do you talk about the level of employee engagement, or even like how culture can still be built in an asynchronous kind of way?
Yeah, that's a super valid question, right? And I think to me, to make hybrid and like fully distributed work, right? Like it literally comes down to two different things, right? Like one is what you're like pointing at, which is culture and like how do we do things within the company, right? And what are the expectations, right? And I think it starts with in some cases or some companies a different mindset, right? Which is there's this whole like thing going on now with like online trackers, or like are you actually like behind your computer and you need to move your like mouse to make sure that you're still active and like all of that stuff. And from a cultural perspective, right, I just think that's wrong, right? Like it starts from like I think things need to start from a place of trust, and like your team is trying to do their best, and like everybody's like trying to get work done and trying to like build things and do all of those things. So I do think it comes down to culture, it comes down to expectations, right? And it's really about like what do we as a company, what do we want to optimize for, right? Like is it online presenteeism, which is your online status indicator like needs to be on green because otherwise you're not like active on your computer, right? Or should we optimize for productivity? And I think, right, like as a business, as a company, you need to be productive. And I think it's always a better choice to optimize for productivity and user happiness and like work-life balance, right? Because like I said, if you make the wrong decisions from a culture and like expectations perspective, I think it increases anxiety, increases pressure to be online, blurs the lines between like work and life, and like all of that.
Kenzo, I'm curious from people who've actually been using your software for a longer period of time, what sort of benefits are they seeing regarding the happy at work and the work-life balance, or any positive changes that have come out?
So I think there are like two key things that like we hear from a lot of users, right? And it's the first thing is one, like in general, the simplicity of what we're trying to build, right? So instead of having to piece together Slack and Trello, Asana, and like all these different tools, like we're building this like all-in-one thing where you can send a message, create a task, write a note, link all your cloud files, do all of that, right? So from a work process perspective and like what your like productivity stack is for to a certain degree, right? Like a lot of people appreciate that flexibility and that simplicity where they don't need to figure out like ping Jack and say, hey Jack, like this document that like you shared, like where is it? Or like is it in Google Drive? Is it in Dropbox? Is it in like all of these different things, right? So a lot of people appreciate that simplicity. Then the second thing is, and this is definitely more of a behavior change to Laura's like earlier point, right? Which is the how do I like switch to a more asynchronous way of working? Because we have this tendency to just the chat message or like let's just jump on a call, and it's that like that requires like a bit more thinking around like what am I actually trying to communicate? And it's almost like this 2x2, which is like, is it urgent? Is it not urgent? Is it important? Is it not important? And based on that, you basically pick the right way to communicate, right? So for instance, and also to a certain degree, like what do you want to discuss? So for instance, if something is like super urgent and it requires you and I to actually have a conversation, and like there are like a ton of things like that you cannot solve by just writing down some text on the computer, because we're all like humans at the end of the day, right? If it's like super important, it's urgent, probably doing a call still makes sense, right? Doing a video call and like having that conversation face to face, super useful. But in most cases, right, like people are not that thoughtful about it, and it's, hey, let's just jump on a call and let's just like schedule a recurring like weekly meeting, and then like before you know it, your entire calendar is full with like Zoom calls, right? So the second part, I think a lot of people are starting to realize, and we are very opinionated about some of these things, right? So for instance, in the product, like we don't have online status indicators, right? So I don't know if my team is online or not, right? Like I can ping them and ask them if it's like super urgent, but in general, like we don't have online status indicators, so you don't know if anyone is online. The second thing we also don't have are things like red marks on messages, right? So in some of these apps, when you send a message, it has like a checkbox behind it or a check mark behind it that says, Jack read this message. Now, we also don't have that. And all of this stuff is on purpose, right? Because each of these things, I think, leads to anxiety and pressure for people to be online, right? And like a couple of examples here are, if I check my messages at 10 p.m. at night because I'm like, hey, like I have the app on my phone anyway, and I open my messages and my manager sees this red mark behind that message, like Kenzo is online, so I can ping him about like because he's like clearly, and like that's not the case. Maybe I just want to stay ahead of what is coming my way tomorrow, right? But like that red mark actually like then forces me to think about, okay, should I open my app? Like if I do that, like my team or my manager will see that I'm actually like online, and then right. So we're doing these things that like try to decrease anxiety and pressure for being online all the time, and like that, like to a certain degree, like it takes a bit more like getting used to, right? So those are the two main things.
Yeah, that's so cool. So I think it's clear you're in your camper, I think, doing this podcast right now. And so that's just so cool. And I think about what message you're sending to your employees, right? About what matters and your leadership. I'd be really curious for you to share with us your career and your career trajectory and how you've kind of gotten to this point of, starting Rock and doing meetings from your camper. Like how did you get here?
Yeah, happy to share some of that. So I'm not a US native. I was born and raised in this tiny country called Suriname. And sometimes I look around me. I'm currently in the Bay Area in San Francisco. So sometimes when I look around me, it's like vastly different from when I grew up, right? Like literally at any point in time, like some people have like 3 or 4 connected devices on their body, from their watch, their phone, to their like headset or like whatever. And like that was definitely not the case growing up, right? Like I grew up in South America. I was fortunate enough to go to university in the Netherlands. Did my first startup straight out of university. That startup didn't end up working out, but I really like building things. I really like being in tech. So started working at Google in 2006 in the Amsterdam office. Moved to London for Google as well, like relatively soon after that. And at the time, I worked on products that I think a lot of people probably like know or like have definitely used, like Google Maps, where Google Maps was not everywhere. So we literally like, ended up launching maps from Finland to Sub-Saharan Africa and everywhere in between, which was this amazing like once in a lifetime experience, like actually bringing digital maps to like a bunch of countries that in some cases didn't even have maps. So I really like that, and like that power of technology to enable people to get more information, get more things done, and like really as this like tool that like helps them. Then moved to the US about 10 years ago, joined the Android team relatively early on. And then worked on the Android platform and Google hardware for a couple of years, where I used to run marketing for Android globally. And it's same thing, right? I think just that, like, just the ability to put like a supercomputer into everybody's pocket, where you don't necessarily need to pay the Apple tax, where like iPhone like nowadays costs like $1,000 or like whatever it is, but like with Android. Anyone, even if you only have like $10, like $20, can buy like a super cheap Android device and just have all the world's knowledge and information at your fingertips. So I've always been like drawn towards these products that really like enable people to do things better, or like empower them, for lack of a better term. So after Google, joined Uber. A very similar story. I was part of a team that was mostly focused on coming up with new businesses. And as part of that, I helped build the Uber Eats business. And then after that, I really wanted to build my own startup to solve these problems that I had seen being at these bigger tech companies. So that's me in a nutshell.
It's amazing, Kenzo. Do you feel part of your success is because you were taking risks? Because you could have stayed where you grew up, but then you went to the Netherlands, which is a big move, and then to the UK, and then here to the US. So do you think there's something baked into it for people who are watching this, that they feel that maybe you have to push yourself outside your comfort zone and take some chances and take some risks? And if there's not opportunities where you are, go to where the opportunities are? Is that, did you do that purposefully, or just for whatever reason it flowed?
That's a very like deep and interesting like question, which I haven't really spent a lot of time thinking about. But I think first of all, I think I've been like super fortunate, right? I think it's I've been fortunate like being in the place and the time. But I think like taking risk probably has something to do with that. But I would probably like characterize this a bit more as curiosity and like curiosity and like where do I think the world will be in a couple of years, right? And like I said, like I started working on this collaboration platform for distributed teams, right? So this is like 2.5 years ago, before everybody was working in distributed fashion, because I do think that longer term, this is just how work will get done, right? So I think that like sense of curiosity, I think is super important. And I had the same thing with when I started working at Google and when I started working on Android, right? Where like, I think in my mind, like even then, like 12, 13 years ago or whatever it was, right? Like super early in terms of like mobile phones, right? Like to me, it was clear that like there needed to be a solution that was super accessible to everybody who cannot afford the Apple tax, right? Like, why wouldn't like billions of people have access to a super cheap phone or mobile device? And like, I think that's where Android came in. So I think it's more so that like sense of curiosity and like trying to figure out like, what will we need in the next couple of years?
That's what do you think? What is next? Do you have a sense of what that next big idea is, that big technology innovation?
Yeah, I think it's right. Like if you're in the like tech ecosystem, like bubble type of thing, it's like Bitcoin and crypto and like Web3 and like all of those things. And I think all of that is like super interesting and super relevant. In my case specifically, I'm really passionate about like the future of work, right? And I think it's like one of these things where the pandemic, for all the like bad things, all the like negative things that have come out of the pandemic, I think one thing that it has done and that will stay the same, hopefully when we move beyond the pandemic, is the sense of you don't need to be in the office to get work done, right? And if you just think about like the office as like this construct, right? Like if you just go like read through history, and like the office as we know it, like has been around for like about a century and a half. And back then it kind of made sense, right? Like you had an office, you needed to go to the office because the means of production or the things that you needed to be productive actually were all in the office, right? From like typewriters to like the rest of your team. And like you could only like talk to them when you were like in the same room and all of that stuff. But especially in the last like 5 to 10 years, with the, and I'm just talking about the technology side of things, like with the advancements that we've been making in terms of connectivity, high-speed internet, video conferencing tools, to what we're building with Rock, right? Like we're now making it we're now enabling people to work from anywhere, like literally work from anywhere, right? And then when you think about that, right, like if you just fast forward to, let's say, 2030 or like years after like today, right? Like, why wouldn't you be able to work from anywhere, right? Like currently, we have people in 10 countries, 7 time zones, and we're all building a product that's like super complex that like 5 years ago, like most people would think you would be insane to try to build something that we're building now, right? But I think this will happen more and more, and I think that concept of an office needs to go away. And we should really think about like what do we what do we need that we used to get in the office that we cannot get through any of the technological tools that we have, or like rethinking processes and culture and like those types of things. Yeah, but I think that's what I'm excited about. I think that is what is happening, and that that will look quite differently like 10 years from now than it does today.
So do you think, and this is maybe premature, but do you think you could have a metaverse office or a virtual reality office where you don't have to go to a physical place, but if people just want to congregate together, that could be the next step?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this quite a bit, right? And I think the absolute worst case scenario would be that we replace Zoom with the metaverse, right? Like, can you imagine like being in like the metaverse from like 8 to 8 or like whatever it is with like a headset on and like all of that stuff, right? So if people have Zoom anxiety now, imagine having like VR anxiety, right? So I like, yeah, I would be very sad if that is what will happen. I do think, right, like one of the things that that might be a good application of the metaverse is the more like informal brainstorming, right? It's you walk around in a room, you walk up to the whiteboard, you sketch something on the whiteboard, somebody walks closer to you, they can actually look at it. And I think that human interaction thing is very difficult to replicate when you are not in an office and you're working in a distributed fashion. But like with all of these things, right, like there needs to be a balance between how often do you do that, right? In the case of my company, like we try to keep meetings to a minimum, but I do meetings which are more like conversations, right? It's like I talk to people on my team. We talk about things that that are either like personal or like more complex, and like you need to have that like back and forth a bit in terms of like creativity, in terms of brainstorming, or in terms of those types of things. And if anything, I think something like the metaverse could be a good fit for that. But there are also like other tools, like digital whiteboards and also like non-technical, non-technology based like things. Right? Maybe you should just do like an offsite, like once a quarter, where you just meet up and you and it's more like no meetings, no presentations, just socializing and brainstorming, and more of the like ad hoc conversations that you used to have in an office.
I think you're kind of getting at this, but I was wondering about how you think about your own employees, because you're really, what you're trying to do with your product is really change the employee experience, right? And I've heard some of the words around trust and creativity and some of the curiosity part that you were talking about. How do you think about that with the kind of culture you're trying to create at Rock? What are some of the things maybe that you emphasize, or your philosophy around your employees?
Yeah, I think the things I mentioned are things that we try to apply at the company on a day-to-day basis, right? So start from a place of trust, communicate like asynchronously by default, keep meetings to a minimum, and I think all of those are like super important for a distributed company. By all means, we have not figured all of this out, right? Like I would love to do something like an offsite where like we pick a random place somewhere on Earth that's in the middle of where most people are, and that's like in our case, it's probably going to be somewhere in Africa or like whatever it is, right? And make it easy for people to fly there. Like to my earlier point, like spend some time together where we don't do meetings, we don't do.
Wait, are we invited to do this, by the way, Kenzo? Because this sounds kind of fun.
Of course. As soon as the world opens up again, properly opens up again.
Okay.
Like, yeah, I'm looking forward to meeting everybody in person because most people in my team I have not like actually met in person. Right? Like, we did interviews, like job interviews over Zoom. We've been working together in some cases for like years, right, without actually having seen people. So I'm very much looking forward to that. Yeah, so I think yeah, so all of the things I mentioned, I think, are things that we are applying. But like to my earlier point, like it comes down to culture and like how expectations are within the company, but then also like what are the tools that you use and like are they actually being used in a way that I think helps teams work in a more distributed fashion, as opposed to doing the like very human nature thing of staying in the office and like how do we replicate the office, right? It's a goal like that I think is like misattributed to like Henry Ford, right? Like if I would have asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses instead of the car. And like in most cases, what companies are doing now is like, how do I build the hybrid office? And like maybe I should do this thing where there's this always on tool that like as soon like from like 9 to 5, like your audio always needs to be on because that's the way it was in the office. And I'm like, I don't think that's the right thing, right? Like it's really like, what are we trying to do? Like, and it's like it starts with employee happiness. It starts with productivity. It starts with like working together as a team, building a culture, building products, building or like doing provide services, like those types of things, and then think about like how should we actually structure ourselves, right? Because the office is this construct that like we invented, so we can reinvent that, right? Like what should that look like?
You know, I know you mentioned about the offsites, but what about people who are, let's say, naturally gregarious, or let's say young people coming into the workforce who want to have, in-person experience? They want to kind of, everyone's different in how, they want to interact. Are there ways to do that in addition to the offsites, you think?
I think there are. We have not done as much of this ourselves, and like I said, like we're still trying to figure this out while we're doing it, right? It's but if it's primarily like remote or distributed, right? Like there are like different tools, different ways that you can actually like encourage this, and right, and it goes back to like process or culture and tools, right? Like there are tools that like randomly send like 2 people within a company a message and say, hey, Jack and Sam, like seems like you haven't talked to each other. Maybe you should like jump on a call and then like get that interaction, right? And like those things are like super interesting to me. But I haven't really found like a good way for us to do that. But I do think a lot of this is very much like personality based, right? Like separate from like how a company like operates and how a team operates, all of that stuff, right? Like some people need that like social interaction like every single day. And I encourage people on my team to always say, hey, like, what can we do to improve, right? Like, what are you missing? Like, and what are we not like doing because we're not in an office together, right? So, yeah, and I do think it's one of these things where I think the human element, like some of this stuff, right, is going to be the most difficult thing to figure out, right? It's this whole concept around like if you look at like AI and like machine learning, right, like what are the jobs that are going to be safe in the future, right? Because most of the like traditional jobs, like engineering or being like a doctor or like those sorts of things, I think AI and ML to a certain degree can replace. But the things like if you're a nurse and you have a set manner and you can walk up to a patient and like comfort them, and like I don't think a computer is going to replace that anytime soon. And it's the same with work. With technology, you can like do things. You can build the tools to do some of these things a lot better, especially if they are purpose built for distributed teams. But the things that like are more difficult to solve, and that's where actually doing an or like sharing things with the team like come in, which is like how do we actually like fill this in? Like how do we solve these? How do we fill in the gaps between processes and tools, and like how do we actually get some of that some of that like some of the social aspects back? Yeah,
that makes sense. As you're going along, I guess your employees or your customers might start bringing that up to you and saying, hey, how can we do it? And I guess it'll keep evolving because we're still in foreign territory, right? We're still kind of feeling our way. We look like things were great, then you had the Delta, then we think things are great, you have Omicron. So we're still in a state of flux. So I guess the same thing with your platform, that as time goes on, there might be a turning point where a lot of your employees or customers say, hey, you know what? I'm bored being at home. Let's do something. Let's get some other social element. Or they just may say, you know what? I don't want to do that. I don't want to hang out with everybody else. I'd rather just do my job, get it done, and then leave my life. Be with my family, my kids, my dogs, my cats. So it's interesting. Now, are there any other questions we didn't ask you, Kenzo, that you'd like to share with us?
Um, hmm. Yeah, I don't know, right? Like I think we covered like most of the different things. I do think um I do think that like one of the benefits, I think, like being more distributed, right? And I think most startups for sure will be like more distributed on the day one, right? Like there's no like reason to do the like old school, let's find a garage somewhere in Silicon Valley and like build the entire company from that garage, right? Um, I do think one of the things that has been overlooked is like the economic impact of like being able to hire from anywhere, right? And I think that's super important, right? Because like we literally have people on the team that like I would not have even considered at Google or Uber because hey, like they're not in Silicon Valley, right? Like, and these are like amazingly talented people that are now part of the team, are now building this tool, and I think that's great from like the economic opportunity perspective because you don't need to be in Silicon Valley to actually uh, build build a product like ours, work at the tech startup, and do all of these different things. But also from a diversity perspective, I think that's like amazingly powerful, right? Like instead of saying, hey, we have this like this box that like we're going to build in because we think this is our perspective on things, right? Like we literally have people from like every single continent except I think Antarctica and Australia, right? So as a result, I think the product that we're building just has a different feel to it, and like hopefully solves problems that like I wouldn't know about because I have been in tech for the last like 15 years and like working for bigger tech companies for the last 15 years, right? So and I think if that applies to a company like ours, like can you imagine like what that will be when how that, like other companies are doing this and like and being way more inclusive and like way more diverse in terms of background and perspectives and all of that.
That's great. Hey, wait, you know what? I lied. I have one more question, and this is very self-serving. So when are you going public, and are you getting your pals over here in on the first round? What's the game plan here?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I don't know, right? Like for this sort of stuff. So we're not going public anytime soon.
Mhm.
And in general, right, like the way I like to think about these things is you just built a great product, right? You built a great product that a lot of people love and use, and then like whatever comes next, right? Like so that's really what we're focused on.
So just focus right now on getting a big client adoption of your product and getting it out there, bringing some revenue, getting the name recognition, and then maybe get around to financing and take it from there. And then we get insiders because like we're your buddies now.
Yep, always happy to have that conversation. But like in general, like that's pretty much it. Right? Like
all right, cool.
We're building product, and we're trying to get people to see not just like what we can do to simplify like their daily work, but also why asynchronous is so important, and that's why it's always like super fun to talk to you, Jack.
Well, this is great. So hey, I got another idea. Hey, Michael, how about this? You know how Julio Smithers? So we interviewed this gentleman who runs basically DHL of Mexico, and like anything that comes, any cargo pretty much that comes into Mexico City comes through him. Great guy, and he invited us for the holiday party that he has that seems to be really off the hook. So maybe instead of Africa, we could do it in Mexico. so you can come there, we can all get together and have one big blast.
I'm totally open to that. I think that should be a lot of fun. And yeah, I don't think I've stepped into a plane in the last like year and a half. So
Same.
very much looking forward to that.
All right, well, great, Mike. Dr. Laura, any other things
No,
that
Kenzo, thank you. This was so
Thank you so
fun.
much.
And love your insights. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's a great story, man. You know what? It's amazing. I mean, you don't hear too often somebody grows up in a really small country, moves to Netherlands, moves to the UK, moves to the US, works at really, amazing companies, Uber and Google, sets up your own company. I mean, that's great. That's awesome. It's kind of like the American dream, right? Where you come here and you you're able to do whatever you want to do. It's invigorating. I love it. I love that story. It's fantastic. I mean, do you
Yeah,
look back? Do you look back and say this is crazy where I am now compared to where I was?
I don't know, but like not that often. And like I
Yeah.
said, like I've been like super fortunate, and I've been super fortunate. So yeah, I am very like appreciative of that. Where yeah, yeah, and in general, like really enjoyed this conversation and talking
Excellent.
to Laura and Jack and Mike as well.
Well, thank you so much. It was great seeing you again. Well, take care. I really appreciate your time. Thanks a lot. And thank you, Sam, for setting everything up.
Thanks,
Yes.
Kenzo.
Thanks,
Thanks
Kenzo.
everybody.
Bye, guys.
Take care.
Everyone.